Good morning, everybody. We're just letting people into the meeting, so if you just bear with us while everybody joins the call, we'll get ready and going in a couple of minutes' time. If you want to just keep yourselves on mute for the time being, that would be appreciated. And just keep bearing with us. Thank you. Okay, then looks like we've got most people on board. 1 minute past 11, so I think we'll crack on from there. As I mentioned earlier, if you wouldn't mind just keeping your microphones on mute for the time being, that would be greatly appreciated. But first and foremost, just a big welcome from the Northeast Regional Interest Group. I'm Neil Hodgson, I chair the Northeast region, and with me today, Alan Shaw, my secretary for the committee, and also Andrew Marvin, our speaker this morning. Just really a few sort of things just to mention at the start of this presentation, please, if you don't mind, just bearing with me. It's just really to remind people, if we can move on to the first slide, that'd be great. But just really to remind people to visit the IRM website. Obviously, there's lots of information available there. Including not only our regional interest group, which obviously you're aware of because you're here today, but similarly the special interest groups that we've also got on there as well, things like the cyber, charities, climate, etc. And there's more than things beginning with C, by the way, just the ones I've mentioned there. Also, I don't know if you recall, there is in preparation for the 30th anniversary of the IRM, there is a IRM risk agenda survey, as you can just see there on the picture. And obviously, as many people as possible would appreciate if you could take part. So if you haven't done at this moment in time, if you could please do so. And also just a quick reminder that we'd love you to become a member if you're not already. We know some people join these events from a CPD point of view, from other institutes, etc., etc. So if you're available and if you're thinking more of these topics would be of interest, then please look at the website again and look at becoming a member. Currently, we've 260 members in the Northeast Regional Interest Group, but obviously we're always want to get more and make this as useful a session as possible. But we're always obviously interested on what you want to hear about as well. If there's any of you on the call today that are willing to be a speaker, obviously if you've got subjects, topics that you think are pertinent and sort of burning questions that need to be answered, then please do let us know. And similarly, actually, we'd love to get back to doing an odd face-to-face session like this in the future as well. So again, we'd always look out for venues, people that might be able to host us, to invite people to. Certainly we haven't got anything planned on the face-to-face side of things as yet, but we are looking to do so later on in the year. From a housekeeping point of view, as I mentioned earlier, if you wouldn't mind just keeping your microphones muted. I think we're expecting circa 80 people on the call today. The session will last for probably hopefully no more than 60 minutes. It is being recorded, so that will be available as will the slide deck afterwards as well. And I've just put onto the right hand side of the slide deck there just where you will find that. So if you're clicking to join our community, go down to the Northeast England group. I think probably within the 24 hours after the event, you will find the slide deck and the recording there for your own viewing. The chat function is available on the bottom of the screen, as you will see. I'm sure most people know how to work Zoom nowadays. I think what would be good, if you have questions that you'd like to ask during Andrew's session today, please feel free to ask them, but if you can do it on the chat function, that would be great. That will allow us just to obviously just really control what's going on. But similarly, if you want to verbally ask a question at the end of the session, as long as there's time, then I'm sure Andrew will be more than happy to do so on conclusion of the presentation. Feedback is obviously a major part of what we do, and obviously if we can improve, take on board what you're telling us, then we will do so. So within the chat function, again, there is a link to the Survey Monkey. We'll post that again, near the end of the presentation. And look, please take 2 minutes out of your day just to fill that in and let us know, that would be absolutely great. So just moving on to the presentation, and if we just move on to the next slide, please. We've got Andrew Marvin joining us today. Andrew's the Regional Client Service Director for Gallagher, but probably more importantly today's conversation, he's also the National Cyber Lead for Gallagher UK Retail. And for today's presentation, which we hope you'll enjoy, it's very much aimed at trying to help you understand sort of the current cyber threat to your businesses and your organizations, how cyber criminals work, with a few hopefully possible controls for the future, and also simply just look at perhaps what the conflict in the Ukraine has had an effect on the cyber threat marketplace as well. So I think without further ado, I will cease talking and pass control over to Andrew. Andrew, good morning and thank you.
Morning, Neil. Morning, everyone. Thank you for the invite today, and thank you for allowing me to speak. As Neil said, my name's Andrew Marvin. I work for Gallagher's, but I have spent the last 4 or 5 years immersed in cyber risk. So cyber risk hasn't just been around the insurance element of it. Cyber risk is around how do businesses control their infrastructure and reduce the amount of potential downtime they have from an attack. So I'm hoping today you find useful. As Neil said, any questions, any queries, anything you want to throw in and comment, please use the chat, and Neil and Alan will try and sort of moderate those questions as we go through. And if there's a bit of time, we've got some time for sort of Q&A at the end. So let's get started. Cyber risk has been around for some time. In fact, cyber risk has been around sort of forever computers have been invented, certainly sort of 1970s onwards. You might remember the first sort of 1980s for the younger members of us that did the watch Matthew Broderick in trying to hack war games, and I'm showing my age a little bit now, Neil. But cyber warfare or cyber hacking has been around for a long time. However, it's only in the last few years when actually people and businesses have really begun to understand the damage that cyber and cyber threat actors can actually bring to your business. So let's get into that a little bit. So the first thing is to try and bring what does the UK say about it? What's the UK's government view? And the majority of the risks has been around ransom. Now, gentleman we're looking at there is a guy called Sir Jeremy Fleming. He is the director of GCHQ, which is, as you all know, based in Cheltenham, and GCHQ is the government communication headquarters. They also lead on cybersecurity through the NCSC as well. Now, in 2021, he gave a speech, which I think is a couple of years, 18 months away since now, but it's really quite useful in terms of what he said, in that ransomware is proliferating, it's largely uncontested, and the criminals are making really, really good money. And I think that's important to know. 2 things there. Largely uncontested, in other words, no one's getting arrested. Secondly, they're not getting arrested and they're making very good money whilst they're doing it. Now, if this was in a room, I would probably then ask you to put your hands up. How many of you drove here? How many of you, if there was no chance of you getting caught, might speed a little bit? Obviously, all being good Institute risk management members, none of you would be speeding. But should you do so, the chances of getting caught are low. And most people, human view is, well, if I'm not going to get caught, let's do it. And that's what we're seeing here. There isn't really any controls. The national and international law are trying to control it, but it's not happening terribly easy. And we'll see a little bit more why later on in the presentation. So let's have a little look at what we're talking around and try and break down why criminals are doing it. So a lot of people sit there and think, oh, it's someone in the back bedroom, and it is, but it's a lot. These are businesses that do the hacking. These are groups of individuals all come together as businesses like you work in, day out in organizations. It's the mafia gone large. It's the mafia gone digital. So let's look at the type of things that mafia did and sort of criminal organizations did 1990, 1991. Amazingly, we actually have data for what they and their costs related to drugs and the drug trade, so cocaine and heroin trafficking. So if you look on the left-hand side, generally they were making around about $60,000 profit per kilo trafficked. Their costs were around about $5,000 per kilo trafficked. So that's their mules, that's the people movement, that's the paying off whoever they had to pay off, etc., etc. But they still had a profit margin of 91%. The 0.5 equates to a 0.5% chance of them being arrested. And 0.25 was the chance of actually being killed, whether that be by local enforcement, international law enforcement, or more likely someone else whose pitch you are playing on. So it wasn't the most easiest industry to do. And to be fair, whilst 60,000 US back in 1991 was a lot of money, there was a lot of hard work for them. Now translate to the data that for 2021. To our knowledge, no one has died as a threat actor from cyber. And the really interesting point is the next stat, 0.0008% chance of being arrested. 98% profit margin. Their costs work out to be around $2,500 per attack. And they are on average making about $140,000 per attack. Now that's an average. It goes up and down. But if you imagine the number of attacks that have been on in 2021, which was right at its peak, that is the majority of that's a significant amount of money. Which goes back to what Sir Jeremy Fleming said. It's a lot of money and it is uncontested. The vast majority of claims that came in 2021, 80% were ransom related. That's where the risk really was. So let's have a little bit more statistics. The average recovery time, 2021, 2022, for a business was 21 days to get back up and running again. Now that had some impact depending on the type of business they are and the type of attack, and we'll come back to that. A lot of people sit there and think, well, is it just the ransom? It's not. The ransom cost is the one thing which you are posted by the threat actors. But by the time you've added in the fact of lack of trade, compensation, legal costs, forensics, and we'll cover that a little bit more, it worked out to be that the total cost of the business was 5 to 10 times the cost of the actual ransom. Amazingly, 42% of UK businesses in 2022 in a survey said that they did not have a plan for how to handle a loss or how to handle an incident of a cyber nature. Now, those businesses that did have a plan, that 21 days came down a little bit. Those businesses that didn't have a plan, that 21 days doubled, tripled, and in some cases, I've seen some businesses 5-6 months later still being impacted by a cyber threat. This isn't a risk that's going away now. It is still recorded as a top 5 risk across the UK, Europe, and the US. Now, we take an awful lot of data from a variety of points, and one of them is the IBM Ponemon report, and you can download that. That's available. You just Google it. It's the IBM Ponemon data. Their data suggests that for a business, medium-sized business and organization that's been impacted, the average cost, including forensics, loss of business, business impact, legal costs, forensic specialists, was around about £4.3 million per one attack. Now that goes up and down depending on the size of the business, but as you can see there, there's a big risk to a business. Now, can you imagine if you haven't got this instant procedure in place and that 21 days goes up, you could be in some serious difficulty to running your business long term. Now, the risk has conflated in 2022. Start of 22, we started to see the risk coming out of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. You saw a lot of the threat actors were based in and have been based in the sort of Eastern Balkans for quite some time, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Russia, etc., etc. So this comes as no great surprise. But some actors and some threat actors based in Russia started to align themselves to their country. So in this particular case, Conti sat there and said, if the Western governments are going up against Mother Russia, then we're going to go up against you. So we saw an increase of threats by Conti, and indeed fairly early on after the start of the conflict, we saw a UK business get taken down by Conti. We also saw the Ukrainians then fight back, and they then released a cache of emails about Conti, which effectively said Conti is a business. It has a CEO, has a COO, and it showed the ornogram of how they work and how they run as a business, which made them less effective because their mystique was gone. Around about April time 2022, there was a survey done of threat actors based in Ukraine and Russia and Belarus, and they stopped counting at 32. So that just gives you an idea that we're not just talking about one or two groups here, we're talking about quite a few, and they all then have affiliates that then work across different types of ransom strains. So the risk hasn't gone away. And if anything, the Ukraine conflict, Russia, the conflict is continuing to exacerbate. So in terms of the top 5 sectors of risk, this doesn't come as any great surprise. The healthcare, business professionals, finance, insurance, education, local authorities fits in there, government organisations fits into there as well. Manufacturing, people have been quite surprised about manufacturing, and that has caused a lot of manufacturing businesses some problems because they have operating technology as well as IT, laptops and things like that. They have technology that operates machinery. And it is possible for us to break and the threat actors to break that machinery. And then if you've broken that machinery, you've then got to import new equipment, and your downtime can be anywhere up to from 6 to 9 months to recover. So manufacturing has been hit quite hard by some of the threats. The others, the healthcare, business professionals, finance, insurance, this is around data. It's around the data breach. Their systems are being compromised, and it allows them to be able to access more data, makes it that the value of the claim, the value of the ransom becomes more and more and more to the threat actors. In terms of the breach costs, just going back to what sort of businesses are facing, again, going back to the IBM Ponemon report, they equated that we're at a 7-year high in 2022, and the UK is now the 4th most expensive behind USA, Saudi Arabia and Japan to deal with a threat. The average cost to deal with the breach, so that's just the experts, that's the lawyers, the legal costs, telling people that have had data breached or its data's now out of your control, telling people, asking the forensics to get involved, the ransom negotiators, they've got an average of £1.4 million, which is, again, it's a significant cost to any business. Interestingly, the attack method has an impact on the cost. So if it's by phishing, so that's where someone clicks a link potentially that they shouldn't do and allows people into the systems, at that point it then really does become a problem, and it's quite costly. Those businesses that become more mature in their cyber maturity and have got what's called the perimeter defense. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, cyber and cyber risk management is awash with acronyms, usually 3 and 4 word acronyms. But so you've got MFA, multi-factor authentication, EDR, XDR, MDR, or SOC or a SIEM. That's all around how you control access to your systems. But what we are seeing is no one system is infallible. Breaches are still happening. But where someone has put a control in place, we see a significant cost and saving. The focus out of all of this, if we take one thing away out of this completely, is staff training and perimeter security are critical and vital to the long-term stability of your systems. Now, some statistics to show, as I said right at the start, cyber's been with us for some time, but ransom and ransom attackers and ransom threats have only been about quite recently. And you can see that this is global data. And it shot up massively, interestingly, at the start of the pandemic. And that was because most people went home, had to take all the laptops home, didn't have the right level of security. Businesses didn't know what they were doing, struggled to catch up. Less people, if they weren't in the office, oh, I've got an email. Oh, have you had an email? No. So they're just clicking the links, and that allowed people in. People were sending more data than ever before, and that made further weakness in the system. So you'll see some pretty punchy years in 2020 and 2021. And then as business started to become more mature, that number started to come down. But it's still a risk. And if you have a ransom, you will know about it. Now, it comes as no great surprise that those losses then fed through to cyber insurance policies. 2021, we started to see a 100% plus increase. 2022, another 70% increase. And I'm sort of pleased to say that if your systems have started to be a bit mature, if you have got some controls in place that you can evidence to insurers, you will probably see this year a leveling off of terms, maybe a 5% plus, maybe minus 5% in terms, but it's very much around the controls that you've got in place. You can't, no longer are cyber insurers happy for you to accept the risk and then just say to the insurers there, can you deal with us if and we're not going to put any controls in place. One of the things that we've been trying to be able to support businesses on is, what do they need to do? What do they need as a business to be able to control their systems and control how they manage their risk? And we put together a document, and you've got the basis of it on screen now. The key things in red, usually, yes, it's the minimum standard of security for most underwriters, but it's also what stops the vast majority of the claims. The bigger the business is, or the more data the business holds, or the more secure types of data, so personal information, financial information, health information, the more that amber becomes red and the more the green becomes amber. But in essence, multi-factor authentication, EDR, off-site backups, and training. And that training is going to start to become more red as we go through later on this year. Now, one or two people have asked around backups, why is that important? If you think about it this way, if your backup is on the same system that the rest of your systems are, once the threat actors got into your main system, they've also got access to your backup as well. So your backup's there to design to restore you back up to working should there be a problem. If that backup is under their encryption, under their control, you have no backup. So if the backup's in the same place, we may as well just write the check. It is keep it away from the main part of your system. So let's have a little look around 2023.
Andrew, sorry, just
yes.
A question just related to the last slide that's just come through on the direct messages. Obviously, there's quite a lot to look at there from on a RAG-rated system. But the question really is, actually, that's all well and good to companies that have perhaps got access to that sort of information and the technical knowledge within it. What can people do, and how can they help themselves? What's available to them? What sort of support's out there if that isn't something they've got internally?
Good question, Neil. There's a variety of, so if we start off right at the top with the National Cyber Security Centre, which is the government portal, there's lots of sort of basic free advice on there, which is really quite useful for those people that just want the basic information. The NCSC website really does put out quite a bit of information, but it's quite generic and it's not really bespoke to your business. There are a number of accreditations that you can hold, and the baseline one is the Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Now that's something that we can help with, but in essence, that's an audit against your systems, which then allows you to improve. From our sales perspective, we're starting to pump out more information regarding the threat intelligence. What's the market doing? What changes are happening? Is your data out in the dark web? Because that will then give you an impact of, well, I've got a threat coming in, I perhaps need to deal with it. And I think, Neil, there's a webinar that we can signpost members to if they want to go on, which gives them some more information around how to access that type of data and that type of threat intelligence as well. So 2023, what are we facing? What are we looking at? I think at the back end of 2022, there was, and we've seen this a few times this year already, we've all talked around MFA. And for those that don't know what MFA is, it's the thing that you probably got with your mobile phones that you log on and it sends a little link to your phone, says, is this you? You either have to put a code in, you press a button on your screen, or you might have to take a call. It's something else that you own apart from logging onto the system. Now, like all of these things, people have got bored, employees get frustrated with IT systems, and we started to see that with Uber's probably the most famous, where a Uber employee who was not on duty, off work, was sent in the space of an hour 25 MFA requests. Literally, is this you? And he just kept on pressing no, 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 and then got bored and pressed, oh, for God's sake, yes. That they were in because they gave them access. So MFA fatigue is something really important. That just goes back to the importance of the employees and the importance of the teams and colleagues around the business into how you as a business, how they and their impact on the business, how they can control their risk, how they can help you as risk managers control the risk within the business. The role of the employee is critical and will continue in 2023, 2024 to be so. New insurers are coming into the market with new knowledge. So they've taken what's happened in 20, 21, 22 and have started to provide more additional information. People like ourselves start to take that data as well around aggregation of data, understanding of where these claims are coming from, the new threats that are coming out. All this information is now more readily available. And people like ourselves, we do webinars fairly regular to keep people updated around the threats that are out there. However, we are seeing new risks emerging. So let's have a sort of a view of, let's say, the top 2, 3 of those risks. I spoke earlier on about how ransom has reduced. Ransom has reduced, but if you are hit by ransom, it's going to be costly. £500,000 for just a breach on its own, without paying compensation, without paying costs, without paying the ransom, just the actual managing the breach is not uncommon. So think about the impact of that on your business. So whilst the numbers are actually dropping, the threat is still high. And if they get in, you'll know about it. But we're starting to see some breaches around third-party breach. So that's other people's systems where your data is stored. A lot of people sit there and say, do you know what? I'm okay. I give my data to someone else, or I've got a really strong password system that's stored with a central password control. And that's where you rely on third parties. But those third parties have got the same risk that everyone else on this call's got. So we saw in December, 2 days before Christmas, as it so happened, a major US password storage facility where it's all supposed to be uber secure, encrypted, had their own passwords and had their clients' passwords stolen and encrypted and exfiltrated. So that meant that a business had taken some really good precautions, put their passwords off their network, given it to a third party, and that third party had a problem, and those passwords linked against now the websites that they're applicable to is now out in the dark web. Think about the users, think about the suppliers that you are using for. We talked a little bit around, you'll see there's a bit about patching. Patching is key. That's the vulnerability. So I think we're all probably used to the getting updates on our laptops, whether it's the Windows update or Apple updates, or you get them on your phone, mobile phones. Some people do them, some people don't. Those updates are the software suppliers have found a weakness, have been notified of a weakness, and update them. Effectively, if you don't update the vulnerability that they found, you are leaving a backdoor into your system. Now, I have seen some people, some businesses, some reasonably large businesses actually, not do their updates for nearly 12 months. And one business, whose name I'm not going to talk about, but one business actually had, there were 9.5 months since they last did an update. And as a result, they had on the 4th of January, and they had an attack, and they lost access to all of their data, and they still don't have it back now. That business is really, really struggling. Phishing, I talked a little bit earlier on around the importance of employees not clicking links. That cyber fraud piece and phishing is now critical. So as businesses become more mature, and we've talked around the acronyms and the risk management that businesses have put in place, threat actors have started to change to start see if they can get hold of individuals to click a link. Once they've got hold of your inbox, you've clicked a link, they can get hold of your inbox. Think about what damage I can do if I took hold of your inbox right now. Think about the emails I could send that look like it came from you. Think about how I could fraudulently misrepresent you and send an email to someone else saying, could you please send me some money into this bank account? So that's your business email compromise, and that's your fraudulent funds transfer. And we are seeing an increase in that as well. Something, again, employee training. Can't overstate that anymore. Can't overstate that enough. We all report to regulators, and in this, from a data perspective, the Information Commission Office, or the ICO, handle the regulatory affairs. So I think probably everyone on this call will probably remember in 2017 and 2018, World and his dog was talking heavily around GDPR, that everyone's going to get fined, it's going to be 2 to 4% of global turnover. Now, that's not really come to fruition. Some of the large organizations have had some pretty chunky fines. Google, for example, the European version GDPR have handed down a very large fines to them. A lot of some call centers in the UK have had some fines around how they handle their data, but that 2 to 4% has been the uppermost of where ICO have been. However, the ICO are changing how they look at the risk, knowing that ransom, knowing that exfiltration, which is effectively theft of data once they're in, or encryption of data, which is them locking up your systems for a ransom. Knowing that that impacts people's data, the ICO are now starting to come down hard on businesses whose systems haven't had a process in place. So at the back end of last year, a UK business was fined £4.4 million. And they weren't the world's, we're not talking about being a global business either. And that fine was basically split into 3 particular parts. Part of the fine, because the threat actors came in, because their systems weren't controlled and they weren't good enough. So the fact that they didn't invite them in, it was a malicious attack. The ICO said, yeah, got that, but your systems weren't strong enough to stop them from coming in the first place. So that's thought number 1. Number 2, they didn't know what to do once they were under attack. So they ignored it a little bit, sat on it for 7 days whilst they basically tried to ring someone out the yellow pages. Fine number 2 for that. And fine number 3 was because they didn't have an instant response and they didn't deal with it properly. £4.4 million in total for something that wasn't their fault, but the ICO said, actually, you didn't have the right controls, the right procedures, and the right plans in place. And that's the important bit, that instant response. What do you do? How do you control it? Just like you have, most of your business will have a business continuity plan. You need to have a plan for the instant response and planning. Now, that's something that insurers are starting to take on board now. That's not the only fine that the ICO have done. And insurers are waking up to that fact. Where we already have some plans in place to be able to support businesses to be able to have instant response management in place. And it may well be that you can reach out to people that you speak to as well. Certainly in May and June time, we are looking at putting businesses in one place to be able to do a little bit more around this to help and support them some more. Finally, training and securing humans, phishing simulations and training. So you can do the training, you can talk to employees as much as you like. Rather like health and safety training in the workplace, you have a duty under health and safety training and management regs to make sure that your employees understand the training that you've given them. That is exactly the same now from a IT perspective. So you've done the training, you then need to do phishing simulations. So again, you can go as big or small on this. If you Google phishing simulations, you can, for a very generic thing, they'll tell you how to send a phishing simulation across your network for as little as £100. If you want something more bespoke that's appropriate to business, you'll pay a bit more for that. But in essence, that training, and then following up that people have understood the training is absolutely critical. Finally, just to reinforce the business continuity around incident response and planning. Triage, analyze how you respond, what recovery is required, what specialists are required to wrap around you, media handling, getting the information out to be able to ensure that you've got a good positive message around what's happened is critically important. So I think we've sort of come to the end. We've got time, Neil, for Q&A. I think I went a little bit faster than yesterday under rehearsal, so that's fine.
No, that's super. Thank you, Andrew. That was illuminating and sort of a little bit frightening all at the same time, wasn't it? I think certainly the fact that ransomware, which everybody has always perceived as being the big one, has sort of gone down. And yet now we're seeing obviously the breaches, the business email, compromise, and probably more importantly, fraudulent fund transfers all going up. I mean, it just shows that this is, it's not going away anytime soon, isn't it? So yeah, frightening. Yes, we'll open the microphones up, so to speak. If you would be willing to ask a question verbally, then please obviously feel free to come off mic, introduce yourself and what your question is for Andrew. Alternatively, just while we're
Neil, I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll go live video, shall we?
Yeah, that's fine, mate. Thank you very much. What I've done also in the chat, Alan's very kindly just recirculated the SurveyMonkey feedback form for you just to complete if you wouldn't mind, which would be most helpful. I've also included a link to the webinar that Andrew mentioned for the Gallagher Cyber Defence Centre, and also I thought I'd share the IBM Pokemon report as well, just to stop everybody looking at Pokemon figures on Google like I ended up doing the first time I looked at that as well. So they're all in the chat function. We have a question from Daniel. Daniel, if you would like to come off mute and ask the question, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, morning everyone, and thanks for that great session. I've got a question regarding the payment of a ransom in the event of a ransom attack. What's your thoughts on paying those ransoms? Personally, in our business, there's a bit of a split between paying what is in inverted commas, a legitimate hacker who has a pedigree or a history of returning systems back in their current state, and those who are just the bad ones, the bad of the bad, where they will actually demand a ransom, and when the ransom's paid, still not return data or return corrupt data. Now, obviously, this will depend on the company's backups, as you covered, but it'd be interesting to get your view. Some companies will obviously say, zero tolerance, whereas others say, well, actually, we really need this back, or we're going to find.
Yeah, that's probably the key point, Daniel, and I think it's a great question, and thank you for that. It very much does depend on the company. It massively depends on the type of attack and the vectors that they've used. It also depends on the type of attack that it is, and importantly, as you rightly just said, Daniel, what data have they get hold of? Now, one of the reasons why ransom is starting to drop a little bit is because some businesses are sitting there saying, actually, we've secured our systems, we've got a good backup, we've got procedures in place, we've managed it well from day one, we're not going to pay the ransom, we'll manage the fallout. And we've seen that a few times. We've also seen businesses sit there and say, well, we feel we need to pay because of the reverse of what I've just talked around, but we don't know who or how does that work. So one of the biggest one of the biggest positives about a cyber insurance policy is that it wraps around that 24/7 breach response service. So the moment you notify your insurers we have a problem, is that you get the lawyers, the forensics, the ransom negotiators, the PR, the legal teams around the regulatory requirements, all wrap around you for a period. They become your best friends for about 2 weeks. Usually a daily call for about every day for about an hour for 2 weeks. And at that point, they are used to dealing with, especially the ransom negotiators are used to dealing with the types of groups, and is this particular affiliate going to pay? Is it not going to pay? Is it too closely connected to Russia? So, i.e., can we pay it under current sanction law, etc., etc. But those specialists will guide on a case-by-case basis as to whether payment should be made, not to also take into account whether you actually need to pay it or whether you've got backups and you can escape from this fairly easily. So there's no single answer to that, but there are experts that understand and work almost daily with threat actors, knowing that who's going to return and who's going to give back the encryption key and who's not.
Super, thanks, Andrew. Hopefully that answers your question, Daniel.
Yeah, it does. Many thanks. Again, it comes down to essentially a risk assessment, doesn't it? and different situations for different organisations will vary or require a different treatment or response. No, thanks a lot. Yeah, no, super. Thank you. It's obviously good to know that actually there's a lot of actual help out there. People sort of feel quite isolated in these sorts of incidents, don't they? And it's happening to us, but actually it's happening to a lot of people all at the same time. So having access to experts, you say ransomware negotiators. I mean, that's an industry probably nobody really thought of 20 years ago, and now probably is quite a lucrative trade to be in its own right.
They get paid very well now, Neil.
Yeah, I thought they might do. Super. Any more questions from anybody? So feel free to take off the mic and introduce yourself. I don't feel we've got a tumbleweed moment at all, so that's that's fine. Okay, look, if there's no more questions coming through. Oh,
I have one. Susan Bradshaw, I work at SP Energy Networks, so a utility. I'm just wondering what the profile of operators of essential services is with ransom attackers.
You are high. Some people sit there, some are concerned that some businesses go after, or attackers go after individual businesses, and some businesses are targeted, and that's correct. But a lot of the time, it is literally thousands and tens of thousands of emails are going out from attackers trying to get someone to do something stupid. And then once they're in, then it's payday. So we've seen some very high profile energy attacks, some very high profile energy attacks. And I think most of us will probably remember what happened on the eastern seaboard of the US. Back at the start of last year, where it shut down the oil pipeline that fed all the petrol stations on the eastern seaboard. Energy and energy companies are high on the list because you're likely, if they get into your operating technology, you're likely to pay, unless, of course, your systems. I would also say that you are also part of the national infrastructure as well. So for businesses that are perceived to be part of the national infrastructure, you can also log on to the NCSC's national infrastructure support services as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Susan. Alan, I can see you've got your hand up. Is there anything you want to say?
Just trying to come off mute, and it's not coming off mute. Apologies.
You're off now. You okay?
Can you see me now? Yeah. Okay. Good. It just seems to take a while. So really good presentation, Andrew. Thank you very much for this. I'm just wondering, you don't mention, or you don't seem to mention public sector kind of cyber attacks. I'm just wondering what the incidence rate is of public sector cyber attacks, and I'm assuming the mitigations and so on are all the same as you've already mentioned, but I'm just looking at wondering what the incidence rate is.
It works out to be around about, it's the same as education, it's about 12%. What we're seeing is certain sections of so education is quite vulnerable. Universities, incredibly vulnerable. We're seeing the smaller local authorities who haven't invested, whether that be in their perimeter security or training. What we see with the larger local authorities is they've done the security, the physical security bit, they've got the systems in place, but where they fall foul, it's due to a lack of understanding by their staff and their teams, because we all know what it's like. Bloody IT, I just, you know, the IT is a barrier to doing everything. And well, sometimes it is, but a lot of time it isn't. So we see the larger local authorities being impacted. And that goes with the claims that we see as well. The cost of the claims generally for local authority tends to be quite high. There's not something that we publicise for the obvious reasons, but local authorities, whether it's housing associations to schools and universities, have had to pay ransoms, quite significant chunks of money in the last 12 months.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you, Andrew. So we're just approaching 10 to. So looking like there's no more questions. I can't see anybody's hand up either. On that note, then, what I'll do is say thank you very much indeed, Andrew, for your time today. It was very, very informative, and hopefully people have got a lot out of that. Obviously, you know, Andrew's contact details will be available via the meeting chat, and similarly the slide deck that will be distributed on the internet after the event, probably within the 24-hour period, as I mentioned at all. So thank you, Andrew, for your time today. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Just remember, feedback is great. So if you wouldn't mind just popping into the SurveyMonkey before you depart. Similarly, the links to the LinkedIn posts from Andrew and the IBM Ponemon report are also in there as well for you to have a look at. So please feel free to take those away with you before you dial out. I think when I end this session, you will all be cut off in the nicest possible way. So I would do that promptly. With no further ado, just to wish you all a very, very good day, and we look forward to hopefully hearing from you with further topics and speaker suggestions, and hopefully we'll see you again shortly on our next presentation. Thank you very much indeed, and have a good rest of the day.
Cheers. Goodbye, everyone.